Louisville Alley Cats podcast. For come rain, shine, or anything between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Balthazar.
And welcome to the long-awaited bowl preview. You can see I did air quotes. Long-awaited bowl preview for the Pop-Tarts Bowl up against North Carolina State. And this has been a game that has several storylines going into it for several different reasons. We'll talk a lot about the storylines later. But, of course, we're here to give you the best scouting report that you don't buy and rather listen to for absolutely free. But just before we go into, their actual scouting report, I feel like it's important to go over their schedule and stats from this year. So, Connor, would you like to take their schedule or their stats?
Well, I'll just start with the schedule.
All right.
This year started a little bit precarious for them. Closer than it should have been game at UConn, winning 24-14. Then they lose to Notre Dame by 21, score 45-24. They blew out Virginia Military Institute 45-7. And then they took down their quarterback's former team, UVA, University of Virginia, 24-21. Dropped a close game to Louisville before we knew what Louisville was, 13-10. Beat Marshall 48-41. Then lost to Duke 24-3. But then they ended the year on a 5-game winning streak, beating Clemson 24-17, Miami 20-6, at Wake Forest 26-6, at Virginia Tech 35-28, and a convincing win against North Carolina, their in-state rival, 39-20. So they ended the season very strong and ended up finishing 9-3 with a offense that was suspect at times, but they finished strong and are kind of on an upward trajectory right now.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. Is I wouldn't really be horribly concerned with the team, especially given the middling performances against some just alright schools, but then they ended the year on a 5-year run. So they finished the year really, really hot. But in terms of just their general stats, they were a 9-3 team with a 6-2 conference record, ran for 1,799 pass rushing yards with an average of 4 exactly per carry. Averaged 6.7 passing yards per attempt, 2,357 total. 9 touchdowns to 11 interceptions, 17 rushing touchdowns, averaging 5.2 yards per play. Mid offense, and they're converting third downs on 39.31% of their attempts, which is their best offensive statistic in my mind. But there's nothing about the offense that it all spreads any confidence in me whatsoever.
Yeah, this is a pretty middling offense. The touchdown-interception ratio is not very good, 19-11. That's not very great. Rushing touchdowns is 17, but their yards per carry is pretty bad. Their third down rate is fairly decent. It's not awful, but yeah, this is an offense that on paper is not so great, even though at least in the points they've been scoring, they've done a little better as of late, but it's still an offense that really struggled at times this year against some defenses that maybe they shouldn't have struggled against.
Yeah, a lot of their better offensive performances seemed to be when their offensive line kind of took over and they were playing against teams that they could play bully ball with. If you don't let them play bully ball, it seems like their offense isn't all that great, with the lone exception of North Carolina. But you have the defensive stats.
Yeah, so on defense, they're allowing third downs to be converted just 27.74% of the time, which is fantastic. And then they're allowing 5.3 yards per play, and that's also really, really good. Their turnover differential plus 10, 33 sacks on the year, again, really good. And then their red zone scoring defense, they're only allowing touchdowns 60% of the time and scores 83% of the time, so they're doing really well in that department too. This defense is the calling card of this NC State team. They're really, really strong and just an all-around really good unit. They've really not been blown up by any teams with the exception of Notre Dame and Marshall, but that's kind of an anomaly. Other than that, they've really the defense has won the battle against pretty much every offense that they've faced. And that's difficult to do, but it's a really, really, really quality defense that K-State's gonna be going up against.
Yeah, and I think that's the the big part of this game is going to be the offense versus the defense. Yes, Austin, that is correct. That is how football is played. But you know what I meant. But before we get into the specific scouting report, we also have to go over who they are losing in the portal or won't be participating in the bowl game. We have a list of 7 really notable names. The rest of the guys were kind of depth pieces. The most important one is interior defensive lineman. He played nose tackle for them, C.J. Clark. He ends up losing 451 snaps at interior defensive line. For reference there, the leader on the team in terms of defensive snaps was, if you'll allow me a second to pull it up, was 749. So he was in on just a little over 50% of the snaps for the defense, which is significant as a nose tackle. And then they're losing Lyndon Cooper, who had 311 snaps at center, which again is a pretty substantial number of snaps in the grand scheme of things, given that the total was 812, but it was sort of their backup center. Still worth noting because he did get significant time and played a lot of different positions in terms of depth. Losing Porter Rooks, 286 snaps at wide receiver. He was listed as their 3rd highest receiver. And then Terrell Timmons Jr., 216 snaps at wide receiver. Then, Connor, you can get the last 3, which is perhaps not entirely unnotable, but had the fewest snaps.
Yeah, Michael Allen, they lose him at running back, 190 snaps. They lose another running back as well, Jordan Houston, with 91 snaps. And then Anthony Smith, 93 snaps at receiver. So a not insignificant number of people they're losing. Most of the players are on the offensive side of the ball where they're losing significant impact, but the big one is on defense with C.J. Clark, literally and figuratively.
Yeah. And they're losing pieces to an offense that already wasn't particularly good. If memory serves, they were one of the least explosive offenses in the country, but that's sort of getting into the scouting report. And before we do that, here is a quick word from today's sponsor. And welcome back to this episode of the Aggieville Alley Cats podcast, where we're previewing the Pop-Tarts Bowl up against North Carolina State. It will be the Wildcats versus the Wolfpack, and we're just going to start off on the offensive side of the ball, as we always do, and I'll just give the on top before Connor goes into the specifics. This is a pro-style offense in terms of philosophy. And I mean pro-style offense in the mid-2000s definition of the pro-style offense. They're just not looking for the explosive play very often. And they're just looking to wear you down into dust with a bunch of short plays, whether it be running or more West Coast passing concepts. If memory serves, they are one of the least explosive teams in the country. Which, yeah, you can tell by their offense. And it's a death by thousand cuts philosophy where their goal is to dominate time of possession. In their last game up against North Carolina, they possessed the ball for 40 minutes. They possessed the ball for 2/3 of the game. That is their formula for winning. They want to make sure that their offense can stay on the field as long as humanly possible, and their defense has the conditioning with which to do so. And they want to keep your offense off the field as much as possible. And, I'd say that's somewhat concerning as a game plan, but I'd say that no matter who I was a fan of. But, Connor, you can get into the more general specifics, the specifics about this team.
They, in terms of personnel, they run a lot more 12 than we're used to, but they still run some 11 occasionally. I mean, you're not going to see many college offenses that don't have 11 personnel. Play calling, they slightly favor the run 55% of the time they're running the ball, 45% of the time they're passing. So fairly even-ish split, and that also tracks with their offensive style. They want to play ball control, so you're probably going to be running the ball more, because if you're going to be possessing the ball for 40 minutes, chances are that you're going to be running the ball and burning some clock, as opposed to throwing it 50 times and having a bunch of incompletions.
Yeah.
So that completely makes sense there. Now, in the running game, they like zone running. That's their bread and butter. They want to get everybody moving laterally, and they do run some counter as well as a, pardon the pun, counter punch. And then they also, in the passing game, 19.65% of the time, they're running play action, which, again, makes sense. You're running the ball as much as they are. You should be running some play action. And then screens 16.1% of the time. Again, that also plays to their kind of death by 1,000 cuts, looking for the short stuff, not really looking for the crazy explosive plays every time. They're going for ball control and easier stuff to just keep the sticks moving.
Yeah. And it's a philosophy that, all credit to them. It works for them. And a big part of that is their man under center, and that would be the lefty transfer from the University of Virginia. That is Brennan Armstrong. He missed a few games with injury this year, or didn't play in the entirety of them, missed a period of 3 weeks. But he came back and won his final 3 starts up against Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, and North Carolina. And he's been a generally solid quarterback for not only his entire career outside of, 2 years where he was exceptional in 2020 and 2021, but he's been a perfectly fine quarterback for them this year. His biggest thing is his experience, and he's not the type of person that really makes a whole ton of mistakes. You can see that in his turnover worthy play percentage, which is minimal. It's his turnover worthy play percentage that would be 9.3 thereabouts, their percent, or 10.3%. So 1 in 10 passes isn't really that bad, which, it sounds like, oh, it's 1 in 10 passes. It's not that bad. But, and where he's going to operate his game is a lot of times it's going to be in the more pro style concepts, which means he is going to work the middle of the field. He's going to try and work short and intermediate. But that doesn't mean that he's completely allergic to throwing deep. 15% of his targets, give or take, are deep, and he's pretty accurate on those passes, completing 50% deep left, 38.5% deep center, and then 7.7 deep right. So working across his body, he's not very good at making those completions. That's just about anyone. But outside of that, he grades out really well in deep center and intermediate center, and then he is mid just about everywhere else. But his thing is just, he's such a quick processor, and he's going to make very few mistakes. And the only way that you can really knock him off his game is to speed up his already quick processor by applying pressure, which, granted, their offensive line isn't the greatest at handling pressure, where his grade drop. He only has 2 touchdowns and 2 picks when he's under pressure. Compare that to 9 touchdowns to 4 picks when he's kept clean. I know that sounds like, he has 6 interceptions on the year, only to 11 touchdowns. So that doesn't really help his touchdown to turnover ratio. But you got to keep in mind how few deep opportunities he's. If they're in the red zone, they're running the ball. So, yeah, Brennan Armstrong is a perfectly serviceable quarterback who isn't going to necessarily win you a ton of games, but you can win with him. I think that's the best way to describe him. He's not a quarterback you win because of. He's a quarterback you win with. And he's not going to in any way hinder your team's ability to win.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty reasonable way to describe Brennan Armstrong. But I'm sure NC State fans are probably happy to have him back, because they've kind of been through a pretty topsy-turvy QB room this year, especially in the middle of the season, because they had MJ Morris, who was a young guy who looked really promising, but then after 4 games, he sat out and redshirted and said he was going to enter the portal after the year, so they lost him, which is just a really strange situation. But they'll be back with their number 1 guy. But that takes us to the running backs. We have number 20, Kendrick Raphael, and then number 34, Delbert Mims, in an all-time name. for
I
a running
missed the
back.
second M on the script, but it's Mims. It's still Mims, but there's a second M. Mims the third.
That's still Mims.
Yeah, it's still Mims. I know. But anyway, Kendrick Raphael, but there's one major caveat.
Yeah. They rotate a lot at running back. They're both fairly similar players. Raphael's a younger guy. This is his first season of playing for NC State. First year snaps. Not a good pass blocker, according to PFF. But beyond that, he's fine. He's an okay runner. He's doing most of his running to the right side or right up the middle. But he does do a little bit of everything. He doesn't go off tackle very much, but that's really about it. Other than that, he's pretty versatile. He's got okay size of 5'11", 195. He only has one touchdown on the year. Averaging
13 first downs.
Yeah, only 13 first downs as well. Just 4.8 yards per attempt as well. Kind of an unremarkable stat line here. Just 60 carries for 288 yards. Not a lot to really draw from Kendrick Raphael, but he's still going to be an important part of their running back rotation because they're
out of most of them.
Yeah. So we're gonna have to be prepared for him regardless. And then Delbert Mims, he is pretty much I forget what running back I compared him to. I think it was maybe LeGarrette Blount in terms of his stat line.
Yeah.
Because he is just kind of a touchdown merchant. Like he's only averaging 2.9 yards per carry, but he has 8 touchdowns on the season. He does run on outside zone a lot. Most of his plays are to either the ends or right up the middle. That is pretty much where all of his work is done. But no, he is a 2.9 yards in the cloud of dust running back, according to his stats.
Oh, dude, Harry Trotter.
Pretty much, yeah. He's 5'11", 215. He is definitely a power back. He's fine. He gets touchdowns in short yardage situations. I don't have a lot to say about him.
He's the put your head down, get the gritty yards guy. Like, he's not going to dance around in the backfield. He's going to take precisely what is given for him, precisely what is blocked for him, and not much else.
Yeah.
Which, there's something to be said about running backs who don't dance themselves out of good situations, but there's also stuff to be said who will never get themselves in a good situation. But so the running back room is, for an offense that runs the ball a lot, not great. Not great at all. But their receiving room is at least athletically somewhat better. It's led mostly by Keon Lassane and Kevin Concepcion. The other one would be Porter Rooks in terms of snap leads, but obviously he transferred out. So it's really just these main two that are getting the lion's share of the targets. And Keon Lassane grades out to be an all-right receiver. He's rated as a 54.3 by PFF, 52.9 in the passing game. His biggest problem is he's not the greatest route runner, and that he's just rounding off his routes a bit too early and also a bit too much. He's not the sharpest guy in terms of route running, and he's also not the best at catching outside of his frame, which, is something that you want a, good receiver to be able to do, especially if he's not going to necessarily separate in the best times. But his biggest thing is really just his athleticism and his ability to just catch the ball and then make one or two people miss to get an additional couple yards. I wouldn't describe him as a true home run hitting threat where he's just a nightmare that you have to deal with every single time he's on the field. He's a perfectly fine, good receiver who's going to get some degree of yak every time he touches the ball, which, granted, is not a lot because of the offense that he is in. But if you also look at it, he only has 2 drops on the year, and he also has his fair share of contested catches, that being 5. So he's an all-right receiver with plus athleticism, but he's not in an offense that really caters to his skill set, is the best way that I could describe it.
Yeah, yet to score a touchdown this year as well.
True. And then you have Kevin Concepcion, who's a young guy, 5'11", 180. He's just the explosive athlete with insane acceleration who's used as a gadget player to take handoffs and get free releases at the line. As it stands right now, just think of him as the diet Walmart brand Luther Burden, who we've seen 2 years in a row. He's much closer to freshman Luther Burden in that he doesn't have very many receiver skills as it stands right now. In fact, only 2 catches on the year per PFF.
All right.
And he is, I believe, their 3rd leading receiver in terms of snaps. I can verify this. But, yeah, you can kind of tell what's going on there. They just don't pass the ball very often. He is their 2nd leading receiver. And on 511 snaps, according to PFF, he has received 2 targets and 1 completion.
It was a touchdown.
It was a touchdown. So congratulations to him for scoring the touchdown. But part of me almost doesn't believe that that is correct. So I will be verifying this information because I am almost certain that I have seen him catch more balls than 1.
Yeah, that definitely seems to be a little unusual. I think they said he had 351 pass game reps.
Yeah. Well, considering, so PFF is wrong. He's their leading receiver with 64 catches, 767 yards, and 10 touchdowns.
Well, that's weird.
Yeah, so this is very wrong.
Yeah, no kidding. It could not be more wrong.
Yeah, it literally could not be more incorrect. So, yeah, but still, a lot of the point still stands. A lot of his reps are getting those free releases, those gadget plays where he's said, just, you're getting the ball, be a better athlete than everyone else. Which, you're going to complain about that if that's on your team?
No.
Yeah, exactly. But, Connor, you have the tight ends and the left side of the offensive line.
All right, so starting with their tight end, Trent Penix, number 6, 6'3", 235-pound tight end. A little on the shorter side for a tight end. Generally, you see them be at least 6'4", but, I mean, he's just an inch off, so we'll credit him for it. But not the fastest guy in the world. And also has had a couple of games where he hasn't played very much. The UConn-Miami game, he only played 6 snaps in either of those. But then he also has games where he's playing 30 or more snaps. So it's been a little bit of an up and down year for him in that regard. But he's pretty reliable. He's not super flashy, but he gets the job done. And he's also very experienced. He's been at NC State since 2018, so he's in his 6th season of getting snaps for NC State. So he's been around the block for the Wolfpack.
Yeah, he's been here a minute.
Yeah,
been here a minute.
And yeah, this year hasn't taken any deep routes. Hasn't had a ton of targets, only 18 on the year, but he has made the most of those targets. Really, for the most part, 14 catches on 18 of those targets. Pretty much everything in the short and the intermediate. And he's got 3 touchdowns on the year as well. Does have a drop, so that does lead to a fairly high drop percentage just because of the lack of targets. But he's still a pretty quality tight end, and he's those stats indicate that he's very situationally used, and he is only getting so much of the offensive snaps or the targets. But when he does get the targets, it's because something's really been drawn up for him. And that means that they see him as something reliable in the red zone, most likely. But he is still a factor to account for as a tight end / fullback. He isn't going to be a major threat in the receiving game, but he's not someone that we can just ignore.
Yeah. Yep. And then you have the left side of their offensive line.
Yeah. So at left tackle, we have Anthony Belton, a gigantic human being, 6'6", 336 pounds. And he played the entire season. And like a lot of people in NC State, had one of his best games of the year against North Carolina. He had an 86.5 pass blocking grade in that game. Only a 63.1 run block, but that's still at least average. He graded out to 70.7 overall. But despite being 6'6", 336, he's pretty good at handling a speed rush and making sure that he's staying in front of people. So for his size, he is a pretty convincing athlete, and it is really good to really good at staying in front of people and not just falling into the stereotype of being a massive offensive lineman that's more of an anchor than someone that can kind of move in space. So he is pretty valuable in that regard for NC State. 812 snaps as well this year for Anthony Belton in his second year starting. So he's got plenty of playing experience, and he'll be a force to reckon with for our defensive ends, especially because we're probably going to be seeing some younger guys due to a few transfers. So it'll be interesting to see how we attack Anthony Belton, or if at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also worth noting that their line as a whole is giving up pressure on just under a third of their dropbacks, 31.75. So pass blocking unit, not necessarily the greatest.
Yeah, which that brings us to Anthony Carter Jr., number 75, the left guard. At 6'3", 305 pounds. He's been okay this year. Grades out to just a little below average at a 58 flat. But his pass blocking is just a little above average at 63.8. He's good at passing off stunts to Anthony Belton, so those two have a pretty good connection, which, again, we've said it time and time again, that communication and knowing the people that you're playing with on the offensive line, that's one of the most important parts of being a good offensive line, is being able to communicate and knowing what the guy next to you is going to do. And so Anthony Carter Jr. and Anthony Belton, they have that Anthony connection, I guess. And
the Anthony telepathy.
So they're able to do a pretty good job there. But Anthony Carter Jr., 756 snaps on the year. So another very experienced lineman from this year. Very high snap count along with Belton. But he's been pretty solid this year. Could be a better run blocker. Not the greatest in that department. And he still, according to PFF, they see him as just about an average offensive lineman. 6'3", 305 is okay size for guard, but not like an impenetrable wall at the very least. But he's a solid guard.
Yeah. And then you have Dylan McMahon, who was their starting center at the outset of this year. He's a perfectly fine center. He's been starting for 4 years, been playing for 5. 66.7 PFF grades, 70.4 pass block, and a 68.0 in the run blocking game. He's a perfectly fine, good center. That the only notable thing I had to say about him is he has a tick whenever he snaps the ball, where he snaps his head down half a second before he snaps the ball. And it's not a silent count thing, because he did it at home as well. So he just has, I guess, a tick where, at least in the games that I watched, where he just snapped his head down like a half second before he snapped the ball. Which, if you're able to time that up, you could probably get a pretty decent jump off the line, unless he realizes it now and has stopped. In which case, I have nothing to say about him. But, 6'4", 305, he's a pretty good offensive lineman. And it's like a lot of these zone schemes where almost all of your linemen are going to grade out to be pretty good because they're operating in a system where they can't easily pin one person and say they failed. So it's really difficult to assign blame to ding grades. That's also very similar with Timothy McKay, who's listed as a tackle, 6'4", 312. He's their right guard. He's been playing right guard ever since week 9, after starting the year at right tackle, and he got worse at his guard position. He was averaging average grades at right tackle, and ever since then, the highest grade he's ever gotten was a 64.9, averaging somewhere in the mid-50s. And that's being generous because I'm bad at math. But his pass blocking grades have also gone down. So if you're finding someone who's out of their natural position in a zone running scheme, it's easiest to spot them. It's still not the easiest thing in the world to do entirely. But you can definitely tell that he's playing out of position because the way he jumps into his pass sets is very similar to how a right tackle would do so, or just a general tackle, which means that he's overexerting himself to the outside as opposed to trying to work and feed rushes into the center. Which, there are worse problems in the world to have, but that's still not something that you want your guard to be doing. Then you have their right tackle who's bounced up and down the lineup between left and right tackle, but will probably be playing right tackle for this game. That is Jacarius Peak, who's the smallest of the linemen at 6'4", 285. And he's rated out to be pretty solid, 62.8 offensive grade, 74.6 in the pass blocking, and then 59.2 run blocking grade. It is worth noting that there is no real correlation between his pass blocking grades going up or down depending on left or right side of the line. So he's just a consistently solid tackle. This is his first year getting significant snaps. So he's fine. That's the number one way that I would describe this line is even when they fail, it's hard to pin their failures on one person or say, oh, this person did this thing wrong and he's doing it consistently. No, it's just sometimes you lose. I know that's riveting analysis, coming from me, but sometimes you lose and there's not much that you can do about it, but it doesn't mean you didn't lose. You have any final notes before we move on to defense?
Definitely not the best offense that we have seen this year. It's not even particularly close. And in fact, this offense probably is on the lower end of offense that we've seen across this year. Because even some of the games that we dominated, we saw better offenses than this. I think Houston's offense was on paper probably
Houston's
better offense.
On paper was better.
So, but we also are going to have to weigh with that some of our transfers out on defense and who will step up. So it'll be interesting to see the offense of NC State versus K-State's defense, just because there are some unknowns there. But this is a matchup that should favor K-State on paper. But again, it remains to be seen just because we don't know 100% who's going to be filling in, Kobe Savage's spot, for example.
Yeah. But then we got the defensive side of the ball. And Connor, you have their personnel and coverages as well as their first player.
Yeah, so their personnel, they run a 3-3-5 or variant of it. Most defenses do this at this point. They walk up an outside linebacker into a wide 9 and favor the rush defense and pass rush part of the SAM role as opposed to the pass coverage one.
K-State, which is the opposite of what we do.
Yeah, K-State favors the pass coverage part because Purnell's more playing as a traditional linebacker. They just take the guy that would be Desmond Purnell and he stands outside of the defensive end.
Yeah, outside of the tackle.
Yeah, so that's their defense.
Yeah, that's their defense.
Yeah. And coverage, they're playing a lot of off coverage and they blitz a lot as well. But then on the interior, just getting into their personnel, of course, they're losing their main nose tackle. So Brandon Cleveland, number 44, which is an interesting defensive lineman number, especially for a nose. He is their only interior defensive lineman with more than 100 snaps that is remaining. He has 206. So he, not too bad there. He's really been graded out with a fantastic game once this year, and that was against Notre Dame of all teams, where he got an 86 grade. Good for you, man. But beyond that, it's been mostly slightly above average play for Brandon Cleveland, which isn't anything to sneeze at, but he isn't as dominant necessarily as his old battery mate CJ Clark. But he does take him. It does take him a moment or two to get started when he is going on a rush, which I get. He's 6'4", 300 pounds. It takes a while to get an object that size in motion. I've been there, man. I get it. So, but he's a Power 5 football player, so he maybe should be a little bit more explosive. And then he tries to attack one side of the lineman, meaning that his ability to rush with true power isn't really there. He's just kind of more grasping for leverage and trying to out-angle people. But he'll just try and rip and ride to the outside as a nose tackle, which isn't really what you'd expect as a nose tackle. That's
more of an end or a 3-tech thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking in my mind as a 3-tech, which his size 6'4", 300 maybe lends itself more to a 3-tech And he might be a natural 3-tech, and that may be why he's doing that. But that's not the position that he's playing right now.
He's playing nose.
Yeah, so he needs to go more for a true power, but he's not really doing that. So that's potentially an exploitable position there if he doesn't figure out his form a little more. But he's in his second year of playing. He's definitely playing a lot more than he did last year. And his grades from year to year are very consistent. A very slight increase, almost not even worth mentioning from last year. But he's solid. He's got 8 pressures this season, 2 sacks, 2 hits, and 4 hurries, 13 tackles. Pretty standard fare stats for nose tackles. There's just not a lot of stats you can really write down for nose tackles because most of the time their impact is not
felt on the stat sheet.
Yeah, the stat sheet is just not where nose tackles live. It's you really have to you have to pay attention really a lot of times in the games to see what they do. And sometimes nose tackles make it fun to do that, like Timmy Horn in 2021. He was fun to watch, but not every nose tackle's impact is obvious, and Cleveland could be one of those guys, but he still has some development to do.
Yeah. And then we move on to their edge players, or what's listed as their edge players, which is Devin Van, number 1, and then Savion Jackson, number 9. Van is 6'2", 280. He's playing their strong side defensive end. He's graded out really well the entire year. It's also worth noting that the entire defense, outside of one really, really, really exceptionally great player, is one of those defenses that just has insane cohesion, which is why they're so good. Because if one person is making a mistake, another person on the defense knows that they're about to make that mistake, and they're immediately going to compensate for it. And they're just not going to have, in those situations where they do make the rare mistake, someone's going to be covering for it, and then someone's going to cover for them, and so it's basically just a brand new defense. But that's more of an aside. Whereas Devin Van, he has a 76.3 defensive grade, 76.7 run defense, 69.6 pass rush grade. He's got a total of 32 pressures this year with 6 sacks, 6 hits, 20 hurries, and 1 batted ball. 32 pressures in a year is exceptional, especially on only 355 pass rush reps, so he's just under 10% pressure rate.
That's 11 fewer pressures than he had the prior year as well, which is makes that even more impressive, maybe.
Yeah, especially when he's playing that 3-3-5 defensive end position, which scares me, honestly. So, he's an exceptional player, and he's really strong in both the running and passing games, and he's the definition of the type of player that you want in this 3-3-5 scheme, and he excels in that role. It would not surprise me if he decides to go out this year or next year for the NFL draft. It would not surprise me at all whatsoever if he ended up being a late day 2, early day 3 pick, just because of how he's built and how well he plays his position. Then you get into Savion Jackson, who is no slouch in his own right at 6'2", 290. He has a 71.5 defensive grade, 83.9 run defense, and then 57.2 pass rushing grade. He has 18 total pressures on the year, 3 sacks, 3 hits, 12 hurries. His biggest thing is he's not the first off the ball, but he takes explosive steps, and he's just going to punish any lineman not in sync with the center. And you'll notice that it is consistent where he's not the last person off the ball, but he's pretty close. But he makes up with that by being just massively explosive and immediately just booming you the moment that you give him any opportunity to do so, which is a big reason why he's such a good run defender, is because he's an insane force player. But in terms of pressures, if he's not running you immediately back, if you can survive the initial onslaught, basically, he's a perfectly fine contain rusher at that point. It's about surviving the initial, admittedly very, very rough initial punch with Savion Jackson.
Yeah. Something I do want to note about these two defensive ends is their size. Both of them are 6'2". Both of them are 280 pounds plus. That is the size of defensive end that K-State needs, I think. It's not necessarily a preview thing. That's more of a broader implications
That's a statement of fact.
Yeah. It's just those are the type of players that I think we should be gunning for in terms of frame. We might have a few on the roster. Jordan Allen, I think, could get close to that number. Chidiobi Izor, I bet could get pretty close to that number. He's taller and longer as well.
Ryan was close to that, and then he caught mono.
Yeah, so it could happen to anybody, really could have. But I think that's the type of player that we're going for more. If you follow the transfers that we're targeting that are visiting, some of those guys are pretty similar sized and bigger even. I think that seeing this listed with the 335 guys for NC State, I think that also helps put in perspective why a guy like Nate Matlick transfers, because he really is out of position for K-State. And this is a whole separate side tangent, but I felt like it was relevant with their edge rushers because they're quality edge rushers. But those are the type of guys that I think K-State should be trying to get. And I think that we have those guys on the roster. We just need to develop them.
Yeah.
But that's a whole side thing.
Yeah. Now onto the linebackers.
Yep, there's 3 linebackers. Number 2, Jalen Scott. Number 11, Peyton Wilson. And number 10, Caden Fordham. And I believe Peyton Wilson is the one who won the
he is.
Bednarik.
He won the Bednarik, yeah.
Yeah. So, pretty good. But we'll start with Scott. 6'1", 225 pounds. 69.2 overall defensive grade this year. 77.1 on the run defense. Pretty quality there. 68.3 in the pass rush. I don't really put much stock into tackle grades, but they give him a 61.7 there. And then a flat 60 in coverage, so perfectly average, according to PFF, although that's with a few really bad performances and a few elite ones as well, so make it that way you will. But Jalen Scott ultimately averages out to an above-average linebacker that plays well in the system. He's all right at fighting through blocks, though not necessarily meeting them. He kind of ducks the blocks to get around and change running angles and play the force a little bit. He's good at that. It's not really what you'd want him to do, but it works. And
he's their Austin Moore, I think, is the best way to put it.
Which, Austin Moore's a good linebacker, so can't really be too upset with that.
Yeah, the only difference is that, Jalen Scott likes playing downhill more.
Yeah. Jalen Scott likes playing downhill. He is looking to clog any running lane or find a hole or gap in the line to rush through. He is a head-on-fire downhill type of linebacker, which they're a lot of fun to watch when things are working, but then you sometimes get games where everything kind of falls apart. Like this year, the Marshall game, he graded out as a 41.2 defensive grade. Sometimes you can get exposed by over-aggressiveness. Granted, he played 91 defensive snaps in that game.
Yeah.
I'd get pretty tired, I think.
It's no coincidence that the games where NC State lost is the games where they had more offensive snaps or more defensive snaps than offensive ones.
Yeah, so there's something to be said for that. Then Peyton Wilson, 6'4", 238 pound, best linebacker in the country, according to the Bednarik Award. So I'm really going to get the best of the best here in this game. 88.7 grade over the course of the season. 83.2 in the run defense. A 90.6 tackle grade. Again, I don't put a ton of tackle grades, but when your tackle grade's that good, you're probably good at tackling.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, and then
it's good at the extremes.
And then 90.4 coverage grade. Fantastic for a linebacker. And then a 73.4 pass rush grade just to add to it. There's really nothing he can't do.
He's the best linebacker in the country.
Yeah, he's probably worth a first-round pick in the NFL draft, and not many linebackers are, especially in the modern-day NFL. But he can do everything. He had 22 pressures this year and 6 sacks. There's nothing that he can't do. Peyton Wilson's going to be a problem. I'm not looking forward to facing him at all.
Not at all.
He genuinely frightens me, and I will be locking my doors up until the bowl game is done. But there's not much I can really say to add to it other than he's got a ton of experience, and he really just burst onto the scene this year. Kind of a late breakout according to his grades, but he has been around the block. Playing in 5 seasons. I think he may have gotten hurt in 2021 and cut his years short. But yeah, he's been here since 2019, and he's in the seasons that he hasn't been hurt, he's played at least 366 snaps in all of them. So tons and tons and tons of experience for Peyton Wilson, and he's just a really good linebacker. I wish our offense the best in trying to figure out how to.
Yeah, because he lines up as an edge player too, which
good luck with that.
Yeah, have fun.
The last linebacker, though, not as notable. No offense. It's Caden Fordham.
Well, it's hard to be as notable as linebacker of the year.
Yeah, so there's that. But he's 6'1", 228, 61.8 defensive grade, 71.4 in the run defense category, 72 tackle, kind of middling. Pass rush 55.7 and coverage grade of 54.9. He's listed as their Mike backer, and he's fine. This is his first year as a starter. He has played in the prior 2 years, though. Not a lot notable on him, really, other than he really had a bad game against North Carolina, and other than that has been consistently decent throughout pretty much the entire year. Not a pressure threat. Only 5 pressures on the year, just 1 sack. I have nothing else to say about Caden Fordham.
Yeah, there's not much to say. Then you get into their corner room, which is led by Shaheem Battle and Aiden White. Shaheem Battle, 6'2", 195. He's sort of the jack-of-all-trades guy. He's been playing all 4 years. And the defense asks a lot of him in particular, where he's going to be the one who's handling most of the coverage trade-offs. He's doing the motion trades. And he's gone as far as to playing just true center fielding free safety because of how coverage trade-offs work in this defense. So he's probably the most versatile weapon on defense, and he's graded out to be pretty, above average or well above average. 72.2 defensive grade, 72.5 run defense, and then 70.7 in coverage. In terms of allowed balls, he's allowing the receptions on 49% of his total targets, and a reception and then 18.8 yards per reception. So again, he's less than 50% of the passes that head his way end up complete, which is very good. Though he does only have 2 picks on the year. He has 3 pass breakups. He's a really good, versatile chess piece of this defense that if you're trying to read him specifically, why, first off, but secondly, you're not going to get much out of it because he can do just about anything from an outside corner position. Then you have their other corner, Aiden White, who is similarly experienced, though doesn't have the same amount of snaps. He's been playing for 4 years. He grades out well, just about as well as his compatriot. 72.4 defensive grade, and then a 71.9 total coverage grade. He's a fine athlete, but the coverage really doesn't do him any favors on the short stuff. He's just a tick too slow in zone coverage to punish routes that break like 2 or 3 yards in front of him. So speed outs, if K-State decides to run a speed out in any time this millennia, that would not be his forte. But he's still only allowing 53.3% of passes that head his way to be completed, and 11.8 yards per reception with 2 picks and 7 pass breakups, though he has committed 4 penalties on the year. So both of their corners are pretty good, and then you get to their safety room, which is really hard to get a gauge on because it's hard to get a gauge on just by virtue of how their defense works, where literally no one is playing like the same position at any given time on like a game-to-game basis. They have 3 safeties that can all do the exact same thing to varying degrees of success.
Yeah, and those 3 guys, they have Robert Kennedy, number 8, Devon Boykin, number 12, and then Sean Brown, number 0. Kennedy, he's listed as a slot cornerback for the most part, but has also started some strong safety. PFF's trying their best, I guess, and just trying to figure out where he's starting.
I don't know where I'd put him either.
Has had a few standout performances this year. Like against Marshall, he put up a 96.4 run defense grade, which is incredible, and 89.8 run defense grade across the whole year. And graded out as a 79.7 defensive player, which is really excellent. And his coverage is really good too. It's a 77. All around a quality safety. has 6 pressures as well and 2 sacks on the year. Granted, both of those sacks came against Virginia Military Institute, so those don't really count as real sacks.
Those aren't real. Those didn't happen.
But he's giving up receptions on 66.7% of his targets, giving up a 9.9 yards per reception. Does have 2 picks and 3 pass breakups. Has had a couple of penalties this year. But all in all, he's a fine safety. Giving up catches on 2/3 of his targets, that's safety numbers, I guess. But keeping the yards per reception down is pretty interesting as well. Doing a little bit better there than I think you might expect, especially given how some of their corners were doing in that department. Not so good.
Yeah, not so great.
And then next you have Devon Boykin, 5'10", 195 pounds. Another guy that's been pretty consistent throughout this year, including his run defense grade of a 91.2 and a tackle grade of 86. Those are both pretty standout. But only a 72.1 overall grade because his coverage grade is just down at a 64, and his pass rush is only a 57.4, and he pass rushes a little bit more than you would expect. 22 pass rush reps for a safety is kind of odd, but only 3 pressures, so make it that what you will. But yeah, not a ton to say about him either. He is giving up receptions, though, on 80% of his targets. Only been targeted 20 times, so it's just 16 catches. So nothing crazy there. Been penalized once. Does have 3 picks, 2 pass breakups, which is pretty solid given that he's only been targeted 20 times. But yeah, just not as much to say really about Devon Boykin either, other than he's got some good qualities. And like his running mate, Robert Kennedy, pretty good in the... Yeah, and
I caught that one.
Pretty good in the run defense as well.
Then the final safety.
Then Sean Brown's the last guy, 6 foot, 207. Again, another guy that's pretty solid across the board. Tackle grade is really high, 86.9, and his pass rush, again, 35 pass rush reps is kind of weird for a safety, but 81.9 in that department. 62.7 overall is all he has, but that's because he's brought down by a 50.4 coverage grade, which is not very good. And then a 75.2 in the run defense. His tackling style is kind of weird. He's very conservative with how he tackles. He is very willing to let a play come to him as a safety, which is a little strange, not what you would expect, really. He's a better tackler because of it, but it also means that he's not really making those splash plays. He's not getting downhill and making a big hit or a huge tackle for loss. It's because he's just kind of setting himself up to just make a solid, uneventful day at the office tackle. He's been targeted 37 times in pass coverage this year, giving up a reception 24 times, 64.9% of the times giving up a reception, 11.2 yards per reception, and he has 2 interceptions, just 1 pass breakup on the year, and he's been penalized twice. So he's fine.
He's fine. He's a good tackler.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is all of the actual scouting report. Now we can go into the stories to watch going into the game. First and foremost, normally we word our stories as questions, but this is just a statement. Welcome to the Avery Johnson era. That's all I got.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, even if it may have cost us something, but
yeah,
we're here.
I'm very happy to finally get the Avery Johnson era underway. I like that he switched to his old high school number of number 2, so it'll be a little different when he's out on the field. But I'm excited to see what we do with Avery as the unquestioned starter now. Kind of similar to how we're excited to see what Will would do as the unquestioned starter this year. Now we're seeing Avery. He's the guy. Everybody knows it. And our game plan is going to revolve around Avery and his capabilities now. So it's going to be exciting to see what we draw up and what's the same, what changes.
Yeah. Next story as well.
Yeah. So related to that, who steps up and separates themselves as Avery's favorite targets?
My heart really wants it to be Trey Spivey. Like, really, really badly wants it to be Trey Spivey. And he'll get opportunities because of how the wide receiver room is sort of panned out with I think it's well, there's a few notable opt-outs. I'm not sure if it's public information, but let's say that one of the leading receivers has opted out. I'm not talking about Ben Sinnott. I'm talking about an actual receiver. But my heart wants to say Trey Spivey, but my brain and also a little bit of my heart is just leaning towards Jace Brown.
Yeah, I think that's a completely fair assessment. My heart is taking me towards Garrett Oakley, which with Ben Sinnott opting out of the game, big opportunity for our man, my boy, Garrett Oakley.
When you Mitch now?
No. But I'm very excited to see the connection that they can build because I think Garrett Oakley's going to be a really nice security blanket for the bowl game, hopefully. But Jace Brown, I don't think you can go wrong with that pick either because Jace Brown does have some really valuable experience as a true freshman. But I hope, like you, that it does end up being Trey Spivey, but I'm not quite ready to say that yet just because we haven't seen a lot of them. But I do still have high expectations for Trey Spivey.
Joke's on both of us. Ty Bowman.
Okay.
And the next question is, how does Connor Riley fare in his first game as offensive coordinator against one of the best defenses in the country?
I'm really interested to see that. We've been told by Chris Kleiman that the offensive philosophy is not changing for the bowl game at the very least. It's going to be exactly the same because they've got 2 years of experience with it now, which I think is the right move. I think it'd be kind of weird to hire in staff and completely change the offense.
It'd be funny.
I guess you could do it, but
it'd be really stupid.
I'd rather not. Funny. But I'm not sure how much we're gonna be able to draw from this for Connor Riley's skills as an offensive coordinator. Just because, like you said, NC State, their defense is incredible. This isn't like the Texas Bowl in 2021, or I guess it was in 22.
It was 22.
Yeah. It's not going to be like that because LSU's defense was nowhere near the animal that NC State's defense is. So this isn't like Colin Klein getting to go out and sharpen his teeth against players by the names of Pig Cage.
I think Pig Cage actually graded out to be like their best defensive player.
No, yeah. Oh, he definitely was good. I wasn't saying that to say he's bad, just to say that...
you just wanted to say
yeah, I just wanted to say Pig Cage. But this is going to be a really, really, really good defense that we're facing. But we still have some weapons of our own, so I'm going to be interested to see the strategies we use to take guys like Peyton Wilson out of the game, and or as much as we can at least. And just what we're comfortable having Avery do. But that's a lot of words to say I don't know how he's going to do.
I'm honestly nervous for how he's going to do, because I've gone on record saying that I'm apprehensive about the Connor Riley hire at offensive coordinator, and Kleiman, I should say, said today that it was going to be an audition of sorts. I think he's lying. I think Connor Riley has the job. I'm apprehensive. I really hope he does well, and I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. But I think against this defense, I would temper your expectations for seeing many fireworks. I think he calls a perfectly fine game. I think that if he walks out of this with a performance that's above like a B, I will be ecstatic. I wonder if he can.
Yeah, this is definitely a tough challenge for your first ever game as an offensive coordinator.
Yeah, welcome to the fire, buddy.
But next story to watch, can K-State keep the time of possession balanced against a team that really wants to control the time of possession?
Yeah, I mean, this is a team that literally just wants to grind you until you're nothing anymore. Like, they want to make you dust by the end of the game. And I think for better or for worse, I think that's one thing that Connor Riley definitely could do and understands how to do, because he understands how his line is going to block for even passing plays, short, long, anything in between, and running plays. He was the running game coordinator. I'm not worried about the running game whatsoever. I'm more worried about the passing game for the future. But I think that K-State, the biggest worry for me is, this is going to sound very strange, is going to be Avery's explosiveness. If he's able to play in control, I think it'll be perfectly fine. But if he is like, okay, first down, nothing, second down, 2-yard gain, third down, 8-yard gain, and then suddenly explosive play. That's almost what NC State wants you to do, is they want to get you off the field as soon as possible so they can grind your defense down. So I'm really looking for Avery and Connor Riley to play a more in-control sort of game, because if they are going to be looking for the explosive play, that's what NC State did, or that's what North Carolina did with a future number 1 or number 2 overall pick in Drake May. I love Avery Johnson. He's not Drake May right now, so that's not a winning formula for them.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that the best way to deal with that is to just play the game, play the game they want to play. And by that, I mean take their philosophy, basically. A team that wants to win time of possession, the best way to counter that is to either score on every single possession that you have in 2 minutes, or to score on every possession that you have in 10 minutes. And I think K-State should do the latter, or at least get closer to it. I don't want to have every possession be 10 minutes. That sounds a little tedious.
That sounds awful.
But I think that maybe the best option for K-State is to try and stretch their drives out a little bit more than maybe they want to, or at the very least are inclined to do, because I think that they stand a better shot against this defense if they keep them out on the field longer. We've seen, at least through PFF, that a lot of times their defensive grades go down the longer they're out on the field, at least for some players. Peyton Wilson, I think, is a machine and is going to be incredible regardless, but I think that if we can keep their defense out there longer and play the sort of game that they'd want to run against us, I think that only benefits us.
Yeah. And then the final question is, with the D-line being depleted only just now as of recording, which unfortunately now dates and times the episode, with just now getting the news that Brendan Mott and Austin Moore will be back, though Austin Moore is not relevant to the question. With the D-line depth being depleted, can the Cats keep up the pressure against especially the running game?
That's kind of the $1 million question. Well, it's maybe the $100,000 question, but it is a question. And I think I'm very interested in what the answer is going to be. I'm not horrified of the answer, but I am intrigued by it. I'm curious to see if we see maybe some of the younger guys a little bit more in this game. A guy like Chidi Obiai's, or maybe even a Jordan Allen. We might see a bit more Donovan Ryman in this game, perhaps. I'm interested to see some of the guys that rotate a little bit more. And I think that being able to mostly stymie their running game is going to be so big, and we need to create disruption against their offensive line and not let their offensive line get in a rhythm. And with a little bit of inexperience on the defensive line, maybe, and losing a little bit of depth, I'm hopeful that we'll see some young guys step up. But it's a guy like Jordan Allen we haven't even seen yet, even though there's high expectations for him. And Chidi Obiai's played all 30 snaps this year.
Yeah. So now we get into offensive and defensive MVPs. I have Jace Brown and Austin Moore.
I have Avery Johnson and Marquise Siegel.
So before we get into score projections, seemingly ever since the middle of the year, we've been doing a segment saying K-State loses if. First off, let me say I personally project this game to be a rock fight. I don't think this is going to be a pretty game. I think that when it's over, no matter who wins, both sides are going to be walking away saying, wow, I'm really glad that's over. I think that is the script for this game. But NC State wins, and it's very simple if their game plan of controlling the clock is successful. Because they're going to end up hitting a lot of field goals. They're going to end up in the red zone if they end up with the time of possession that they want. K-State needs to play a clean game in terms of no turnovers, which is going to be a heavy ask for both a new offensive coordinator and a true freshman quarterback making his first official start. I'm not counting the one where he lined up as a wide receiver. I'm not counting that one. That does not count. But that's how NC State wins this game, is if they make it about their game plan, which is the grind you into dust, milk the clock, and make sure that the only plays that you get are not sustainable in any way, shape, or form. That being said, my score projection, and I hope I'm wrong, I truly in my heart of hearts hope I'm wrong, I have it being a 13-10 victory in favor of the Cats.
I've got K-State winning 24-13. I think that we'll get one drive where the beneficiary of a turnover deep in NC State territory, and I think that buys us at least 3 points. And I think that we can get 3 touchdown drives out of the K-State offense, or the very least 3 scoring drives at minimum. And I think that we can expect a really great defensive performance as well from K-State. I think that it's going to come down to who steps up to replace Kobe Savage. And, is that Steiger? Is that Cobbs? And if they're able to step in and at least be decent enough to kind of stop the bleeding there. But I think that this is a very winnable game for K-State. But I do think that there is a reality where I agree with you that this turns into a rock fight. But I think that the K-State offense might be able to do just enough to pull away. Not by a lot, but just a little bit.
That'd be nice. I would take that. Do you have any final things you want to say about the game?
I think all the portal stuff has kind of overshadowed the fact that we're starting the Avery Johnson era in a bowl game against a quality ACC team. There has been a lot of discourse about the game, at least so far. So I'm really looking forward to it, though. I'm excited, and I can't wait to see Avery Johnson play a full game as the de facto unchallenged starter.
Yeah, I am too. But that pretty much wraps up this episode of the Aggieville Alley Cats podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville ACats. And if you want to email us, we're AggievilleAlleyCats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on a more personal note, I'm at ACEdward00.
I'm at Connor Baltazar, capital C, capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the official Aggieville Alley Cats merch store, link in the Twitter and podcast bios. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alley Cats podcast, where come rain, shine, or anything between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alley Cats.